In today's video, we're going to check out a very cool and instructive game played by Magnus Carlsen. And I know that whenever Magnus is playing, everybody wants to see his game. It is special, but this time it's even more special than normal, as Magnus is playing one of our favorite openings. This is what everybody wants to see, the good old King's Gambit. Magnus is playing with the white pieces against a very strong grandmaster from Austria, Markus Ragger. And in this video, I will tell you everything about what happened in the game, but also give you some inside information on how to play this opening with both colors. So make sure to watch this video from the beginning till the end. Hit the subscribe button in the meantime. If you do like this video, share it among your friends. Really appreciate all your help. And here, off we go. Magnus goes for the move 1e4, e5. And here, f4. That is the King's Gambit. There are different ways of playing. Obviously, it's taking quite a bit of risk to play in such a way as you're also opening up your own king. But the aim is to gain control in the center by challenging the pawn on e5. Now, black can respond in different ways. And d5 is considered to be one of the most respected options for black here, to try to strike back in the center, to open up the position and eventually take over lead in development as black here himself. But Magnus, of course, knows all of this. He goes for knight f3. Interesting move, ignoring the tension in the center. Now, these pawns, they can capture each other. And if black does take on e4, then knight takes e5 and white will follow up with d4. Maybe the bishop will come to c4. Knight on e5 looks pretty nice. Well, that's a different variation. Was not seen in the game, as Markus Ragger decided here to take the pawn on f4 and white captures on d5. Interesting position already. Very well-known theory. The point is that if you do take here with the queen, white will bring out the knight to c3 to hit the queen on d5. So black prefers to develop the knight to f6. So the main point is to try to regain that pawn by taking with the knight on d5. And now white has plenty of options here. There is not one move which is better than all the others. You can give a check, which is really popular. You can develop the bishop to c4. You can protect the pawn on d5 by playing the move pawn to c4. It's all very interesting. But Magnus goes here for this move, bishop e2. It's a very modest developing move, but there's a clear point behind it. Black takes with the knight on d5. And now the main point is already immediately revealed now, as white goes for the move c4, attacking that knight on d5. Very sharp position already, and black does have a number of options where to go with the knight. Now, hard to say what is best. Well, actually, I know if you analyze a bit with the machine, it will tell you, of course, where to go. But for instance, in the game, there followed knight e7. And after white played the move d4, white is about to take with the bishop on f4. And if you can get that pawn and continue developing, you have two fantastic pawns. You have open files, fantastic prospects for white. So black's main idea of dropping back to e7 with the knight is to come to g6, to defend the pawn and make it harder for white to regain that pawn on f4. But the game continues, castling kingside, bishop to e7. Black also is intending to castle very soon. Knight to c3. And here black brings his king into safety, at least for now. But how to continue? This knight on g6 is defending the pawn on f4. So there are different ways. You can try to play something like bishop d3 with the idea probably to take on g6 and trying to take with the bishop later on f4. Magnus had a different idea. He played a move knight to d5. It's an interesting move, as the plan is very clear. You try here to take with that knight on f4 as two pieces are hitting the pawn. How should black respond? And well, black played a normal developing move, knight c6, and there is nothing particularly wrong with this move. But objectively speaking, a better way of playing here, probably for black, is the move bishop to d6, to move the bishop to this square. Probably black didn't fancy this move at all, because there is this idea to play c5 and kick the bishop away. But in the battle for the initiative, you should not keep reacting to your opponent's intentions. Here, a much better move, instead of moving the bishop again, is to counterattack with the move c6. If you do take the bishop, there is c takes d5, and on the next move, the pawn on d6 will be taken, while if you take move back, if you do play knight c3, for instance, you keep the knight on the board, then the bishop can go to c7, and it will be very hard for white to win that pawn on f4. Looks as if black is in good shape, but back to the game, knight c6 was played, knight takes f4. Now, again, black can still continue developing. Bishop g4 is a move which I do like quite a bit. Instead, Markus Ragger played here knight takes f4. Bishop takes f4, so white can develop with gain of time, just get his developing move for free. Bishop to g4, so the plan is here to eliminate the knight on f3 and try to win the pawn on d4. But white is first. White advances the pawn to d5, hitting the knight on c6. The knight doesn't have a great square to go to, so black starts here with a move bishops to c5, giving a check. King goes to the corner, king h1, and now the knight can safely drop back to e7. Well, objectively, it looks like black is having everything under control, as the knight is on his way to g6 to guard the king side. But now Magnus stands up. He's gonna set the board on fire with this move, knight to g5. Moving the knight away to hit the bishop on g4. Black is gonna take, white does take back. And well, you see that white, thanks to this nice pawns and the open files, there is quite a bit of pressure. And with moves like rook ae1 coming next, white is having the initiative. But black goes for knight g6. He is about to take the bishop. And if the bishop is gone, then the knight on g5 is also vulnerable. White can consider just moving the bishop away. Everything is safe, the game goes on. But instead, Magnus is going for the kill. He played queen h5, threatening checkmate in 1 on h7. Only one way to defend. That is the move h6. And Magnus now had seen this in advance. He takes on f7, moving the knight away and try to remove the support from that knight on g6. This is a super critical moment, but you can feel the pressure. White is just sacrificing his knight to attack the queen. And can black take the knight or not? In the game, black didn't take on f7. But he could have done actually. It's not easy to see. But rook takes f7 is not so clear. After queen takes g6, white is a pawn up. And the main threat will be here to take on h6, exploiting the pin, as the pawn on g7 is not able to recapture. But the key defense here is to put the queen on f8. And this is a very good move, very important. You're overprotecting any potential mating threats, but you're also hitting the bishop on f4. Now bishop takes h6 will be met by rook takes f1, and it's actually black who is giving checkmate here first. So white has to be very careful. After queen f8, the only move to avoid an immediate disaster is to protect the bishop with the move g3. You can see here that white cannot move the bishop because of that pin on the f-file, but black therefore can attack the bishop one more time with bishop to e3. And after protecting the bishop one more time, something like rook e8, black is a pawn down, but has a lot of piece activity and should be able to hold on. But back to the game. Instead of taking with the rook on f7, there followed knight takes f4. That is very understandable move to eliminate a very potential dangerous attacking piece. If you take the queen, then black can also take the queen on h5 and black emerges with an extra piece. So that is not recommendable here for white. Instead, just rook takes f4 was played, and that is good because the rook is also protecting the knight on f7. Now, white is threatening to take the queen, so the queen got a move. Black is probably intending here to take on f7 and win a piece. So the next move comes very naturally, rook af1, including the remaining piece into the attack while maintaining that knight on f7. Black played here the move rook ae8. There's not much else black can do. And how should white make progress here? Well, the next move is other great shot by white. As the move queen g6 was played, the queen is now pinning the pawn on g7, and there's nothing absolutely nothing black can do against the threat of knight takes h6. Queen e2 played, knight takes h6 as announced. G-pawn cannot take because of the pin. The king gotta go into the corner to get out of the check. But what to do here? Knight f7 back was played, king to g8. And, well, here Magnus didn't see an immediate win. And he decided here to go back with a knight to h6 to try to repeat the moves. But it's important to point out that black does have a bit of counterplay. For instance, if you try to set up a mating threat with knight g5, threatening mate on h7, there is, again, this back rank issue with queen takes rook. And black is giving checkmate here. So you can't move the knight without giving a check. Then the alternative plan could be to go rook h4 and threaten checkmate on h8. But now you understand why the queen is on e2. It can't just take the rook on f1. So things are not simple. And therefore Magnus went for knight h6 check. King h8 played. And what to do now? I mean, you don't want to repeat the moves here. You're 2 pawns up. But for instance, if you go for the exchange of rooks and aim for further simplifications, at the end of the day, this knight is hanging. There's still back rank mate. The only thing white can do is just keep on repeating the moves. So Magnus finally found the way to proceed, dealing also with the threat of queen takes f1, as the rook on f8 is indirectly hitting the rook on f1. White can actually play knight f5. Very important move, as it takes away the pressure along the f-file while your own knight is no longer hanging, and white does threaten checkmate on g7. Now, if you defend here, for instance, with queen e5, there's rook h4 check. The king can go to g8, and now before giving a check on h7, it makes a lot of sense to give a check on e7 with your knight to open up the f-file so the king can't escape. If you do take the knight, now it's queen h7 with checkmate and the king can't go anywhere. Therefore, after knight f5, black didn't have a good way to deal with the threats of queen takes g7 and rook takes and rook h4. Rook takes f5 was played, giving up the exchange to avoid an immediate mate. But after rook takes f5, here Magnus Ragger felt like this is enough. I don't want to play on. I'm an exchange down, as well as 2 pawns. And there are numerous threats, mainly rook h5 followed by queen h7. So Magnus Carlsen managed to win in 26 moves with the King's Gambit. That is very cool. That's not often we see. And especially keeping in mind that he used his King's Gambit, that makes it even better, of course. Now, I want to tell you a bit about this little line again. So after e4, e5, f4, d5, knight f3. Okay, this is all kind of standard. We talked about this move, bishop e2, and then after knight takes d5, c4. Where should the knight go to? Well, the key move here, the best move for black, is not to go back to e7, but rather put the knight on b4. So you have ideas to put your knight, for instance, on d3, and then it will be harder for white to complete development. So white will continue with the move d4. This is the ambitious setup. And you're about to take the pawn on f4, but there is bishop to f5. And that's a good move, because here you do create a threat of knight c2. With a knight fork, you're about to win material. And the question is, how should white react to this? I wish this was seen in the game, because I'm very curious what Magnus had prepared. Maybe he didn't have prepared anything, but there's a crucial junction here, as you got to decide what to do. If you play passively with knight to the side, neutralizing the threat of knight c2, then black gets the chance here to play the move g5. And here again, typically for the King's Gambit, it will be very difficult for white to regain the pawn. So you got to try to find compensation elsewhere. And that's what I'm thinking, if Magnus was familiar with this position, maybe he would not have gone for the move knight a3, but he would have played more in King's Gambit style, back to the romantic times where material was not important. Just continue developing. You can ignore perhaps the threat of knight c2, because for instance, if you play knight c2 now, the rook on a1 is trapped, but there is bishop takes f4. And if you do take the rook, Now you can continue with knight c3, and this looks fantastic. You're full rook down, but white is also really up in development and about to take the knight in the corner. In that case, you're only an exchange down, and well, that's kind of that's possible to handle for white. But if you go back with a knight to c2, you try to save the knight. White can come in with his own knight to d5 and hit the pawn on c7. Now black can, for instance, play knight to a6, but then there's also bishop to g5, so you get a lot of tempos, and apparently the best move here is to go queen d6, but after knight h4, it's a total mess. This bishop is in trouble, it is hit, and if the bishop goes somewhere, keep in mind that also the knight on c2 is hanging after that. So I'm not saying I don't want to draw any conclusions. I really don't know. It's a blitz game. Anything could have happened, but I think this is extremely exciting. And if you're a King's Gambit player, it could be worth analyzing all this stuff, or better, try it out in one of your own games. Let me know in the comments, what do you think of this game? If you would like to see many more King's Gambit games covered on this channel, and I will do the best, of course. Stay tuned for more. Bye bye.